In this video, we're going to take a look at the new AYANEO 2 handheld, as well as go over the pros and cons of the device. If you enjoy in-depth reviews like this, a sub to the channel would be awesome. This review is a bit later than I would have hoped. I actually had a prototype of this color scheme much earlier than this, but that had some screen issues and couldn't be filmed. What I have now is a retail version of the AYANEO 2, so we can make some definitive statements about each aspect of this product. As I've already pointed out in my first look video a long time ago, one of the main draws to this device is the screen. When I talked about this device competing with the Steam Deck with hardware components, this is one of the big ones. This isn't the first time that we've seen a product in this niche with a display as one of its main selling points, but it is clearly one of the best aspects of this one. Without even delving into the panel measurements, the color accuracy, white balance, brightness, and contrast ratio are immediately obvious to me as being superior to those and other devices that I own. It is also one of the most striking things that I'm left with once I go from this device to other handhelds that I use. Anyway, I've been looking forward to being able to finally test out this panel to see if it's as good as I think it is. When it comes to color accuracy, I got a measurement of 97.6% of the sRGB color space and 93.8% of the P3 color space. Just like the Logitech G Cloud that I recently reviewed, this is a big improvement over the 70.9% of the sRGB color space that I benchmarked on my Steam Deck, and it is easy to notice this difference by the naked eye. For brightness, I got a measurement of 544 nits, which is about the same that you'd get on a Steam Deck, but the contrast ratio of 1330:1 is a huge improvement over the 1000:1 on the deck. Each of these points individually can drastically improve your gaming experience. While we're on the topic of the display, I found myself enjoying the lack of bezels more than I thought I would. I thought it would be more of a gimmick than anything else, but it seems to make the experience more immersive than it would have been with the standard bezels that we usually find in these devices. Another area where the AYANEO 2 attempts to compete with the Steam Deck is in the controls. This app allows you to fine-tune the dead zone to a different value if you want. That brings us to the main benefit that these have in their ability to not drift. Now, I haven't had drifting issues on any device that I own, so this isn't a problem that really affects me. This is more or less a benefit that you won't know that you're ever benefiting from, since drifting doesn't always happen after a set period of time, but it should theoretically stop you from having to replace these parts even if you are a heavy handheld gamer. There's one other aspect of the controls that I want to go over here, and that is the sound tap feature that Aya added to this device. This wasn't something that I could test on my earlier prototype, but it is something that is enabled now. Sound tap converts bass frequencies from games that you're playing into corresponding vibrations on the left and the right sides of the device. This location houses a pretty big vibration motor, and I've never seen the benefit of using these fancy motors before this point. In normal PC games, these almost always feel identical to the normal motors that are used in just about anything, but they shine in this application. The linear motor allows you to get very subtle variations in the vibration that you receive, and it works amazingly in its ability to allow you to feel the games that you're playing. Enabling this is also super easy. All you need to do is call out the Aya menu in a game that you're playing and enable the sound tap feature. After that, you will start to feel vibrations that are one-to-one mapped to the sounds that you hear from the game you're playing, with increased strength depending on volume. The only issue is that sound tap does not work if you're using wireless or wired headphones. This is a killer feature for retro games, which is not something that I ever thought I would use this device for. Everything else here from the controls is normal and works well, but there is a minor issue with the D-pad that I want to talk about. I've tested 3 versions of the AYANEO 2, and each one had a different feeling D-pad. The second prototype that I was planning to film this review with had a D-pad that was decent with some light rough action as you went to pivot. That's the version that all reviewers had. The company was aware of this issue from other reviewers, and they said that they were going to modify it. On my latest version, which should be indicative of the mass-produced process, I found that the D-pad was not easy to pivot and was worse than the reviewer version. I went into Street Fighter Third Strike, and I was able to perform the combos that I usually test with, but it didn't feel as good as I know it can based on the AYANEO Next. The prototypes for that device were impossible to pivot with, but the retail version was quite good, and I was expecting that the AYANEO 2 would be identical since the D-pad model is identical. I can't show how the current AYANEO 2 arrived with a game test since I've already modified it, but I can show you how it stacks up to the sample that all reviewers had. In this side-by-side view, Hopefully you're able to see that the reviewer version was easier to pivot and had a greater degree of freedom. The most recent version, as of the 1st of December, does not have this freedom. If we look at the components up close, we can see that the media sample has a DIY piece of rubber in the center to help with the pivot action. The current mass-produced version does not have this rubber and instead has a small circular gasket. The problem is that this thing is too short, which limits your ability to pivot. Since I'm already here, I'm going to DIY this with some black electrical tape to make this feel as it should. Here's how it was before the modification, and here's how it is now. I've already informed the company about this issue, and they said that they're going to pay attention to it, but part of me feels like some people will get the exact version that I have here, so I wanted to point this out. After my modification, the D-pad feels exactly how I'd expect it to, and it doesn't give me any issues in games. I'll talk about this more at the end of this video. Sound quality is another important part of this device that I want to cover. Ever since the AYANEO Air, Aya has started to use different speaker components compared to the style that were used in all of the devices that came before it. The Air did not have the best sounding speakers, with the audio appearing to be trapped inside the case. I was able to improve this with DIY on the model that I use, but I and many others are expecting that the Aya 2 should not have this issue. The first AYANEO 2 prototype that I filmed with used 3D printed speaker chambers, so I've been holding off my judgment until this point. I don't want this section to be that long, but I do want to tell you how I tested these devices. I took a collection of songs comprised of retro game music and modern songs with a variety of characteristics, and then compared how each device performed. I tested the AYANEO Retro Power, the AYANEO Air Pro, the AYANEO 2, the Udon Pro, and the Steam Deck. Excluding those last two devices, the AYANEO 2 had the best overall sound quality from the Aya devices. The Retro Power model was close behind, but it doesn't have a good low end, and it tends to distort at maximum volume in sections with a lot of treble. The AYANEO Air has the worst sound quality, and the sound itself is muffled inside the shell unless you were to do a DIY hardware mod. The only other thing worth mentioning here when it comes to the Air model is that it has a more pronounced low end compared to the other two. The Udon Pro and the Steam Deck were both better than the entire Aya collection, but the order that they fall in isn't important in this review. I am going to give you a sound clip from a retro game running on each device so you have something to go off. This is a good time to grab a set of headphones, as the differences are going to be hard to distinguish if you're watching this video on a cell phone. For our next section, we're going to talk about ergonomics and build quality, and there are some important things that I want to cover here. There are many things that go into the build quality of a device, and not all of them are visible when you just look at the outside of a device. This particular model comes with a huge glass panel on the front, and it helps to signify that this is a premium device. On the earliest prototype that I used, there were some concerns about the shell around the outer glass edge, and those seem to have been rectified. One of the things that I was personally worried about were the analog rubber tops from Kit. These were used in both of the AYANEO Next units and the Kit controllers, and I can tell you that they are very easy to damage because the rubber material is low quality. When I found out that Aya was going to use Kit as a supplier again, I was worried that the AYANEO 2 would have this same problem, but they told me that Kit refined their process for the rubber tops. Based on my experience with the three devices that I've used, this seems to be the case. I don't know that it won't ever be possible to damage these tops, but I can tell you that the old one could be damaged in just a day of use, so that refinement must have taken place. Outside of these issues, we have the standard things that are usually quite good on Aya devices, mainly because they are the things that the boss likes to focus on. This time around, they went with a different UV painting process for the shell. I have 3 Aya models in this Retro Power color scheme, and I think the original probably had the best overall feeling in my hand, but this one is a close second. It also seems to reject oil and fingerprints the best out of the 3 models. There were also earlier reports of the SD card slot not working on media units, and that is something that I experienced myself, but it seems to also have been fixed on the version that I have here. To be able to talk about the build quality further, we are going to need to get inside, and that is where we need to talk about another issue that I have with this device. Since the Air, AYA has been on a kick where they want to hide any and all screws that are used to assemble their devices. As a consumer, this kind of thing doesn't matter to me at all, and it only ever becomes an issue when this focus makes it more difficult for me to service my own device, and that is where we find ourselves with the AYANEO 2. I want to start by saying that it's not hard to get into this device. It is hard to get into this device without damaging the device. When you think about how expensive this device can be in some of the configurations, you are either going to need to buy a configuration that is future-proof, like this 2TB model, or you need to accept that you're probably going to do some damage to this shell getting this open. Our culprit are these side rails, and as someone that has taken apart 3 of these devices for a total of 6 times, I hate them so much. For the first 2 prototypes that I had, there was no good way to get these off, and the glue that they were using was incredibly strong. The problem is that you need to get some leverage on this part to pry it off. This is made even more difficult by the fact that you're dealing with a gap that in many cases is about the thickness of a razor blade. So what can you do? You can just force something that is much bigger into this gap without any regard to the pristine casing to just get it off to access the 2 hidden screws behind it. That is what I had to do for my first 2 prototypes, and I have to believe that the company knew this was a mistake after they had to do this for themselves. On this latest version that I have, the box came with a set of wishful thinking instructions, a pry tool made out of metal, and some stickers. The idea is that you would place a sticker on top of this area while you use a metal prying tool to get off the edge. This sticker is going to somehow protect your plastic shell from damage, and that is not possible. I was lucky enough to get off one of my side panels without much trouble using this prying tool, only because there was a big enough clearance gap for me to get some leverage on it without doing much damage to the shell. As you can see, the edge looks decent after opening it up 2 times. The left side was a different story. This piece had no gap at all. This gap was less than the thickness of a razor blade, which makes no sense from a design standpoint when you know people are going to need to get in here. The tolerances on this part are just too tight, and the result is that I had to chip up most of this piece to get it off, and I hope it's obvious to you that the sticker thing doesn't do anything in this situation. There are 2 big takeaways from this. On the consumer side, make sure to get the configuration that has enough storage for your needs so you don't ever need to get in here. If you do need to get in here, know that you are probably going to damage your shell unless you use some other strategy to get this off with potential for damage in other ways. On the manufacturing side, stop trying to hide screws if doing so ends up making your product worse for the end user. It is not worth it and no one cares. I have literally never seen a single comment from anyone saying that they do not want to buy a device because the screws were visible. This is a non-issue. Anyway, when we finally get into this device after applying the jaws of life, we can see some positive things. The industrial design on this device is very good, with the Air being the only product that I think beats this out in the AYA line. A lot of the things in here are very easy to service and replace with no special tools required, and you can easily swap out the SSD with a single screw. That process is a bit more involved on the Air. Aside from that, we've got a metal frame under our main board to help strengthen the front shell, and standard flat panel connectors are scattered throughout. You might notice that the inside of the shell is white, and I would normally throw up a warning about that to potential buyers, but the retail version of this is injected with the same color as the outside, so this isn't an issue. When we switch gears to talk about the ergonomics of this device, I only have good things to say. This is easily the best large form factor device from AYA in terms of ergonomics, and it is also one of the best Windows handhelds from this standpoint that you can buy today. They spent a lot of time refining the grip that they wanted to use with this device, and I think they settled on a good compromise between making the device easier to hold for long gaming periods, while also keeping the overall thickness and size to a minimum. The AYANEO 2 is about the same weight as a Steam Deck, but the device is quite dense because they are packing much more into a smaller footprint. When I am using this device, I tend to keep this thing on my lap with the screen pointing up to my face, and I can easily hold that position for the length of my gaming session. Now, as many of you guys will know, I tend to use a lot of my devices at night when I'm winding down from a long day, and the unfortunate thing about the AYANEO 2 is that the minimum brightness level is a bit too high for me to use without disturbing anyone near me. If you look at this comparison against the other 2 AYA devices, you can see that it has the highest minimum brightness level out of the 3, with the the Air being the best in this regard. Since the majority of time that I use these Aya devices happens at night, this would normally be a huge problem for me, but I started using a pair of AR glasses after seeing people talk about them, and it has changed my experience with this device for the better. There are a few of these on the market today, but this one from TCL is the only one that I have used extensively. This thing has two big benefits for the way that I like to use this device. The first is that this has the ability to route audio near your ear, and the speaker quality from these is good enough that I don't need to reach for my usual set of over-the-ear headphones. I can set my audio a bit lower on the AYANEO 2 itself, and then use the volume wheel on the glasses to fine-tune this to my liking. The second benefit is that the screen is way dimmer at its minimum brightness level than the screen in the AYANEO 2. By default, this will be set in Windows to mirror the internal screen, but all you need to do is connect the glasses to the top USB port and then go into the display settings and change it to show only on 2. I thought we might also benefit from some power savings going this route, but these glasses use about 1 watt of additional power compared to using the AYANEO 2 screen at minimum brightness. This combination of being able to lay down and look straight up while holding a very comfortable device is something that I have not been able to experience with other devices. It is easily my favorite way to use this thing. Before we jump into some performance metrics, I want to take a brief moment to talk about software. Unlike other companies in this market, Aya markets themselves as a software and hardware company. That means that you are theoretically paying for both of these things when you buy a product, and to their credit, Aya has provided a decent amount of updates to the Aya Space software that they've been developing for almost 2 years now. The Aya Space software still could use some refinements, but it does help to give you quick access to some meaningful options that are not as easy to configure with other solutions. From a day-to-day standpoint, the TDP controls are going to be your most used feature. This thing is similar to what you'd find on a Steam Deck, but we don't have the ability to dial up or down our TDP in 1 watt increments within this small menu like we do on the deck. Now, they have no chance of competing with Valve on the software front, but they are easily beating out other companies that they compete with that either do not offer any custom software at all or only offer a stripped-down version of what you see here. Aya started to talk about their own emulation station OS built on Linux with this device, and that doesn't seem to be ready just yet, but I was able to see it in person for a little while, and it seems like it's going to be a decent option for those that like an ES-based gaming system. When and if they release that package, you are going to be able to boot your device into the Aya OS system from your SD card. As of right now, that can just be viewed as a potential value-added service. This last big section is all about performance, and we're going to cover a lot of ground here. I want to start by talking about fan noise, since that is a hot button topic among a lot of people in this market. This device is going to be able to more than double the TDP of the Steam Deck, so the question has been, how much noise does the fan make? To give a better picture of this, I am going to record the noise from the fan at 4 TDP levels. I picked 8 watt because it's the point where you are able to get a decent performance bump from the 6800U on the low end, and I picked 12 watt because it's my favorite setting to use at night. I picked 15 watt so we can do a comparison against the Steam Deck, and I picked 30 watt because it's the highest TDP that I would realistically ever use on this device in handheld or docked mode. Without further ado, here's our test. I have boosted the volume of these clips in post to make it easier to judge, but I will have the original audio levels displayed on screen in decibels. Here's our 8 watt test. (12 watt), 15 watt, 15 watt on the Steam Deck, and finally 30 watt. I made sure to record a bunch of PC games at these TDP levels for this video so you can get an idea of how those games would sound by referencing this section. For the final part of this section, let's take a deep dive into emulation performance. For our first system, we're going to take a look at Nintendo Switch emulation. This is a system that runs very well on this device. Next up, we have Xbox and Xbox 360. Wii U is another system that runs well on this device with the CMU emulator.
Assault hammer!
Let's move down to some easier systems with GameCube and Wii with the Dolphin emulator.
Great shot, Luke.
Let's wrap up this video with my pros and cons of the AYANEO 2. On the pros side, there are a lot of things that I like about this device. The biggest pro is easily the screen on this. In a market with a lot of subpar panels, this one stands out as one of the best that you can buy in a retail product. It is vastly superior to any other screen used in a PC handheld thus far, including the older AYANEO Air. I like the improvements that Aya made to their speakers this time around, and I think it's a decent improvement over the original Aya model from 2021. The ergonomics and build quality are also standout aspects of this device, as are most of the controls. I also think the sound tap feature is an interesting addition to this device that can add something new to your retro games. And finally, I like the performance of this chip, as it's the first real improvement that we've seen in an Aya device since the original 4500U version from the beginning of 2021. Even though there are a lot of things that I like about this device, there are some things that I think could be better. The first con for me is the current D-pad situation. I've already mentioned that I fixed this problem by DIY, but it sucks that Aya always seems to have trouble with this. Aya is batting like 50% across all of their products, and I'm just left with the feeling that they should never have stopped using the dome-based designs. The original Aya device only needed a minor change to allow it to pivot well, and it could have given a comparable experience to something like an Xbox controller. They've instead moved to a conductive rubber design, which is way easier to do badly than you might expect. When it comes to a dome-based solution like the one used in the Vita, all you need to do is worry about the physical dimensions of your D-pad part and the center column that helps you pivot. When it comes to conductive rubber, you need to worry about that and the stiffness of the membrane material. Even if you manage to get the physical dimensions of the part correct, which in this case they didn't, it can be a nightmare trying to go back and forth over the formula for your rubber material. That is why you have companies like Ambernick that use the same D-pad and membrane across tens of products. They solved the problem once and they don't want to deal with it again. The next con for me are the side rails, and I hope the company either stops trying to hide screws or they do it in a way that doesn't make the device worse for consumers that want to get in and repair or make upgrades. My final con is based on my use case, but I wish the minimum brightness level was a bit lower than it is here. I think this thing was a no-brainer at the introductory pricing that Aya offered at the start of their campaign. Those units are now gone, so we are left with the standard IGG pricing for each available option with free shipping included in the price. If I were to back this project at the current pricing, I would pick up the Geek model in black if I wanted that color option over the standard black AYANEO 2. That doesn't have a full glass panel or the awesome screen, but it is a little closer to the pricing of the most expensive Steam Deck config, and the ergonomics feel a bit better than the one that I have here since the controls are slightly off axis on the Geek. If I had to have the model from this review with the awesome screen, I would only buy the white option because I think that one is by far the best color option that they are selling. I only had that color option for a week or so, and I was very sad to have to send it back. It is by far the best thing this company has made so far. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the AYANEO 2. If you have any questions, you can leave those down below and I'll try to help you out if I can. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this review, and I hope you consider subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.